We are looking at a stack of sources today that's, it feels less like a biography and more like a collision between two completely different universes.
It really does.
We're talking about Abu Bakr al-Siddiq, and depending on which book in this stack you open, you are meeting two entirely different men.
It is the ultimate historical Rorschach test, isn't it?
Yeah.
In the Sunni tradition, he is the truthful one, the loyal rock who, kept the faith from just disintegrating.
Right.
But then you shift the lens. You look at the Shia tradition, or even some critical secular histories, and the lighting changes completely. He becomes the first usurper, a politically ambitious figure who sidelined the Prophet's family to seize the state.
And usually with historical figures, you can kind of find a middle ground, but here the polarization is the entire point. So the mission for this deep dive isn't to pick a side. It's to sift through these conflicting narratives, the hagiography versus the critical inquiry, to understand the actual man.
Abdullah ibn Uthman.
Abdullah ibn Uthman, right? Because stripped of all the titles, that was his name. And what's staggering is the time frame we're looking at.
Oh, it's tiny. We are analyzing a rule that lasted only 2 years and 3 months, a little over 800 days. Yet, in that frantic window, the decisions this one man made essentially locked in the genetic code for the Islamic world as we know it today.
So let's start with that man, before the legend. We all know him as Abu Bakr, but like you said, that was the nickname, father of the young camel.
Yeah, and that speaks to his background, doesn't it?
Yeah.
He wasn't a warrior or a poet, which were, the usual paths to...
To fame, right. In 6th century Arabia, that was your resume.
Exactly. No, he was a merchant. The camel nickname likely pointed to his expertise in livestock, in trade. But more importantly, he held a specific kind of intellectual power in Mecca. He was a nasab.
A genealogist, which for our listeners who might not realize the weight of that, in a tribal society, that's like being the keeper of the entire social registry.
It's a human database of social credit. He knew everyone's lineage, their alliances, their enemies, and probably more importantly, all their scandals.
So knowing who's related to whom is how you navigate everything. Politics, trade, trust.
Everything. And the Prophet Muhammad famously relied on Abu Bakr's knowledge of lineage to understand who he was dealing with. So it paints this picture of someone who was just deeply embedded in the social fabric, a master networker, not some kind of recluse.
And physically, the descriptions are fascinatingly specific. He's not this imposing, larger-than-life figure.
Not at all. The sources describe him as having a wheatish complexion, sunken eyes, and being incredibly frail. There's that one detail about his belt always slipping down because his hips were so narrow.
It creates a very human, almost vulnerable image.
It does. He was wealthy, sure, he had a fortune of 40,000 dirhams, but he wasn't physically intimidating. His power came from conviction and his proximity to the Prophet.
Speaking of that proximity, the Sunni tradition cites him as the first adult male convert. I know there's a historical debate there with Ali or Zayd.
There is, but the key differentiator for Abu Bakr seems to be the speed of his conversion. That is the consistent thread. While other people hesitated or, asked for miracles, the narrative is that Abu Bakr accepted the message instantly. No questions asked.
And he immediately put his money where his mouth was, spending that fortune to free tortured slaves like Bilal ibn Rabah.
Right. But the real crystallization of his character and where he gets that famous title, al-Siddiq, that comes from the night journey incident.
This is such a pivotal moment. The Prophet claims to have traveled to Jerusalem and then up to heaven in a single night. And the community is, understandably, mocking him. It sounds impossible.
It's a huge test of faith. And Abu Bakr's reaction isn't to ask for details or question the physics of it. It's just this blanket statement of epistemological trust. If he said it, then it is true.
It frames his role perfectly. He isn't the theologian asking how, he's the supporter affirming that. He provides the social proof.
Exactly. He's the ultimate validator.
So we have the loyalist. But now we have to fast forward to the moment that just breaks the timeline in two. 632 CE, the Prophet Muhammad dies.
And this isn't just a tragedy. It's a political vacuum that threatens to swallow the entire community whole. It is hard to overstate the panic.
You have Umar ibn al-Khattab in the streets with his sword drawn, just denying the Prophet is dead because he can't process the trauma. The community is paralyzed.
And Abu Bakr is the one who snaps them out of it. That's when he comes out with that famous line. Whoever worshipped Muhammad, know that Muhammad is dead. But whoever worships Allah, he is alive and never dies.
He separates the man from the message, but while he's managing the grief, there is this massive political crisis brewing across town, at the portico of Banu Saida.
Saqifa. This is the scene of the crime, or the scene of salvation, depending on your perspective. The original sin for Shia historians, the salvation of the state for Sunnis.
And it all happens while the Prophet's body is still being washed, mostly by his cousin Ali and the immediate family.
Right. While they're preparing the burial, the leaders of the Ansar, the native Medinans, they gather to elect a leader from among themselves. They were terrified.
Terrified of the Meccans taking over, right? They wanted home rule.
They feared retribution. They knew that once the Prophet was gone, all the old tribal rivalries would just bubble right back up. So Abu Bakr, Umar, and Abu Ubaidah, they rushed to this meeting to stop them.
And this wasn't some polite debate.
Not at all. This was a high-stakes negotiation to prevent a civil war from erupting right then and there.
And Abu Bakr makes a very specific argument. He doesn't say he's the holiest or the most deserving. He argues based on pure realpolitik.
He does. He tells the Ansar that the Arab tribes will never bow to anyone except for the tribe of Quraysh. It was a pragmatic argument, not a theological one. He argued for the one emir principle. You can't have two leaders or the state will fracture.
And it works. He pivots the room, Umar grabs his hand, pledges allegiance, and it triggers this domino effect.
But the elephant in the room, or rather the elephant not in the room, is Ali.
This is the crux of the split.
It is. The Shia argument, supported by interpretations of the event at Ghadir Qum a few months prior, is that the Prophet had already designated Ali as his successor.
And we should probably clarify Ghadir Qum. This is where the Prophet said, "Of whom I am the Mawla, Ali is his Mawla."
Exactly. And Mawla is this linguistically ambiguous word. It can mean master or leader, but it can also just mean friend or ally.
So, two totally different interpretations.
Completely. The Sunni view is that it meant spiritual closeness. The Shia view is that it was a clear political succession. So when Abu Bakr takes power at Saqifa, while Ali is burying the Prophet, it's seen not just as a political move, but as a violation of a divine command.
And the fallout was immediate. Ali refused to pledge allegiance to Abu Bakr for 6 months.
6 months. That is a massive signal of illegitimacy coming from the Prophet's closest male relative. It created a fractured state from day one. You had the government of Abu Bakr, and then you had the House of Ali, which became this locus of opposition.
And that tension leads us to the two major grievances that define this period: the land of Fadak and the incident at the door.
Right. Let's start with Fadak. This often gets dismissed as, just a property dispute, but it feels so much bigger than that.
It feels like a constitutional crisis. Fatima, the Prophet's daughter, claims this garden estate is her inheritance. Abu Bakr blocks it. But his reasoning is what's fascinating. He cites a hadith that, well, only he seems to have heard.
Prophets do not leave inheritance. What we leave is charity.
It's a profound moment because Fatima challenges him using the Quran itself. She cites the verses where Solomon inherits from David.
She's asking, does the caliph's memory override the written word of God?
That's the question, and Abu Bakr holds the line. He refuses to yield the property. Now, was it just about the money? Probably not.
It was about resources and authority.
Exactly. If he grants Fadak to the House of Ali, he's handing independent financial power to his primary political rivals. By keeping it under state control, he maintains the centralization of power. But the cost was huge. Fatima stopped speaking to him and died just 6 months later, still estranged.
Which brings us to the darker, more volatile narrative, the door incident. And this is where the source material is just it splits into completely different realities. We have to be really careful here. We do. The narrative found in later Shia sources, and hinted at in some chronicles, is that the standoff between Abu Bakr's government and Ali's house turned violent. The claim is that Umar was sent to force Ali to pledge allegiance, threatened to burn the house down, and that in the chaos, the door was forced open, injuring Fatima and causing her to miscarry.
And the Sunni and many academic sources view this differently.
Very differently. They acknowledge the threat. Even an early historian like Al-Tabari records Umar threatening to burn the house. But they generally reject the physical violence and the miscarriage, as later polemical additions, exaggerations, meant to villainize Ali's opponents.
But even if the physical violence didn't happen, the threat of violence is historically significant on its own.
It is. It shows that the transition of power was not some peaceful democratic process. It was established through coercion. It sets the tone for the entire caliphate.
Because as soon as Abu Bakr secures Medina, the rest of Arabia just falls apart. The Ridda Wars.
The wars of apostasy.
And this is where the political science part really kicks in. Tribes start sending word saying, look, we're Muslim, we pray, we fast, but our tax contract was with Muhammad. He's dead, so we're keeping our money.
And this is the moment Islam transitions from a voluntary spiritual community to a geopolitical state. Abu Bakr faced a choice. If he allows these tribes to opt out of zakat, the central treasury of Medina collapses. It becomes irrelevant.
So he had to equate tax compliance with religious validity.
He had to. He defined withholding tax as apostasy, as leaving the religion entirely. It was a massive redefinition of terms.
And it justified total war against people who still thought of themselves as Muslims.
It did. And, it was a stroke of state-building genius in a way. It established a monopoly on legitimacy. You were either in the system, paying into the center, or you are an enemy of God. There's no middle ground.
The brutality of that logic is perfectly captured in the story of Malik ibn Nuwayra. This is the incident that really tests that loyal friend persona.
Oh, absolutely. Malik is a tribal leader, a Muslim who is withholding tax. Abu Bakr's general, Khalid ibn Walid, captures him.
And then executes him, and marries his wife that very same night.
A shocking move. It was a flagrant violation of Islamic law on multiple levels. The waiting period, the Ida, was ignored, and he killed a fellow Muslim.
And Umar is back in Medina, screaming for justice. He wants Khalid stoned for adultery and tried for murder.
Umar represents the prophetic ideal here. The law is the law no matter what. But Abu Bakr takes the side of state realism. He looks at Khalid, who is winning battles and securing the peninsula, and he decides he cannot sacrifice his best general for a moral crime.
And he says that famous line,
I will not sheathe the sword that Allah has drawn against the unbelievers. He pays the blood money to Malik's family, which is an admission of a mistake, but he keeps Khalid in command.
It's pure Machiavellian pragmatism. The survival of the state trumped the application of justice.
Exactly. It proved that the caliphate was going to be an empire, not just a brotherhood. But while he was waging these brutal wars, he launched another project, an intellectual one, the compilation of the Quran.
We often take the physical book of the Quran for granted, but at this time it was scattered everywhere, written on palm fronds, shoulder blades of camels, and most importantly, stored in people's memories.
And those memories were literally dying on the battlefield. At the Battle of Yamama, hundreds of Hufaz people who had memorized the Quran were killed.
So Umar realizes that if this continues, the revelation itself could just vanish. He urges Abu Bakr to write it all down.
But Abu Bakr was terrified of this. He hesitated, asking, how can I do something the Prophet never did? It speaks to that tension between a living, fluid oral tradition and a static, written text.
By codifying it into a book, the Mushaf, they were freezing the text in time.
And centralizing it, because there were other collections out there. Ali reportedly had his own chronological compilation. So by commissioning an official state project, Abu Bakr was effectively asserting that the state is the guardian of the scripture.
One state, one leader, one text.
That's the Abu Bakr doctrine. It's another move toward total centralization.
It's just incredible to think that all of this, the wars, crushing dissent, compiling the Quran, happened in roughly 24 months. And yet, the sources describe his personal life during this time as bizarrely normal.
It's the great paradox of the early caliphs, isn't it? He's commanding armies, but the sources say he continued to milk goats for the neighborhood widows even after becoming caliph. He tried to keep selling cloth in the market until the community basically forced him to take a stipend so he could actually govern.
It suggests he didn't view the caliphate as a kingship with perks. He saw it as a burden.
A heavy one. He died with almost no personal wealth, having returned what was left of his stipend to the treasury. He was ruthless in politics, but completely ascetic in his lifestyle.
So we reach the end. 634 CE, he falls ill. The Sunni sources say it was a fever from a cold bath. Of course, there are whispers of poison, but that's standard for the era.
But the most significant thing he does on his deathbed is ensure that the chaos of Saqifa isn't repeated.
He learns from history.
He does. He realized that leaving the succession open to a vote or a shura would just lead to another civil war. So he explicitly appoints Umar as his successor. He writes it down.
Which is a huge irony. The argument for his own legitimacy is often that he was elected by the community, but he himself abandoned that process for his successor.
He went with direct appointment. He kind of validates the critical view that Saqifa was an anomaly, not some democratic precedent. Abu Bakr prioritized stability over process. He picked the strongest man for the job, Umar, and forced the community to accept him.
And then he dies. He's buried in the room of his daughter Aisha with his head aligned with the shoulders of the Prophet Muhammad.
Cementing his legacy physically. For eternity, If you visit the Prophet's grave, you are visiting Abu Bakr. You can't separate them.
So we've gone through the stack. We've seen the loyal friend, the Nasab networker, the ruthless state builder, the ascetic goat milker. When we try to synthesize this, how do we reconcile the Siddiq with the usurper?
I think we have to accept that he is, in some ways, both. Without Abu Bakr's uncompromising stance during the Ridda Wars, Islam very likely would have dissolved into a historical footnote, a desert movement that died with its founder. He built the vessel that carried the faith forward.
But the cost of building that vessel was the alienation of the Prophet's family and establishing a precedent where power is seized rather than inherited or divinely appointed.
That is the tragedy. The original sin of Islamic politics wasn't necessarily malice, it was urgency. The decision to prioritize the state over the family saved the empire, but it fractured the religion permanently.
It really changes how you look at the map of the Middle East today. The Sunni-Shia divide isn't just about theology, it's a litigation of those 800 days.
It's a 1,400-year-old argument about whether the ends justified the means.
I want to leave our listener with this one thought. We often look at religious history as this inevitable thing, as if the caliphate and the Quranic book were just destined to exist. But looking at Abu Bakr's rule, you realize how incredibly fragile it all was.
It hung by a thread, a single thread.
If Abu Bakr had hesitated for even a week during the Ridda Wars, or if he hadn't backed Khalid, or if he hadn't authorized the writing of the Quran, we might not be having this conversation. We are living in the world constructed by the desperate, terrified decisions of one man in a panic-stricken Medina.
That is the terrifying power of history.
That's our deep dive for today. Thanks for listening.